Hello, and welcome to the Other Minds podcast. I'm Joseph Bohigian. You're listening to Triadic Memories by Morton Feldman, performed by today's guest, Amy Williams. Other Minds, founded in 1992 in San Francisco by Charles Amerkanian and Jim Newman, is devoted to championing the most original voices in new and experimental music. On Season 4 of the podcast, we're talking with a range of composers, performers, and authors across the field of new music. And keep an ear out for news about our 30th Other Minds Festival taking place October 8th through 11th, 2026 in San Francisco. Today's guest is composer and pianist Amy Williams. Williams' compositions have been presented by leading international performers including the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra, Buffalo Philharmonic Orchestra, Jack Quartet, and International Contemporary Ensemble. As a member of the Bugallo-Williams Piano Duo, she has performed throughout Europe and the Americas and recorded 6 CDs of music by Nancarrow, Stravinsky, Varèse, Feldman, and Kurtág. Williams is a professor of composition at the University of Pittsburgh and artistic director of the New Music on the Point Festival in Vermont, where I met her nearly a decade ago, and I'm very excited that she'll be traveling to the Bay Area to perform Morton Feldman's Triadic Memories at Other Minds at Mills College at Northeastern University in Oakland on Thursday, January 8th, 2026. She's here with me now to talk about the upcoming concert. Welcome to the podcast, Amy.
Great. Wonderful to be here.
You knew Morton Feldman from an early age, growing up in Buffalo, where he taught at the University of Buffalo. Could you tell me about your first experiences with him and his music?
Well, I mean, he died in 87 when I was, in high school or just out of high school. So they were earlier memories for sure. I remember he was a very vivid character, a lot of personality. I remember many dinners, and he would sit in the middle and tell hilarious stories, definitely commanding the room with his stories and cigarette and a meal. And so I have many memories of those kinds of evenings. And then going to his concerts, of course, I wasn't for sure even going to be a musician at that point, right, when I was in high school. And so I learned pretty early on that his concerts were rather on the long side. But I do remember thinking the music was so beautiful and required a different kind of listening than what I was used to going to percussion ensemble concerts or piano recitals or string quartets, orchestra. This music was quite a different experience as a young musician. And so it was really quite a few years later that I started to delve into his music as a performer and really discovered the incredible beauty and magic of this music. But I remember Morty as somebody with, a very, very full of personality, full of stories, jokes, just a really, really vivid personality, which many of the composers I encountered growing up in a very, very musical environment, often the composers did have a lot of personality.
For better or worse.
So, yes, well, I became one, so I must have been intrigued by that in some way.
And he worked closely with your father, Jan Williams, who's a percussionist as well, right? What was their collaborative relationship like?
When Morty came to Buffalo in the 70s, they began to work closely together and became the Feldman soloists with the flutist Eberhard Bloom, who was there for a couple of years as a creative associate as well. And I think he felt really comfortable with them as interpreters of his music. And you have to remember that in the 70s, his music was mostly being played in Europe, particularly in Germany. And so to find American performers who were willing to go where he wanted them to go, to play these very long pieces, to find the sensitivity, the way of playing this music, to really communicate it. He didn't have so many committed performers at that time. So when he worked with Eberhard and my father, he was the pianist in the trio at first, and then his eyesight got so poor, and also his he was writing so much that I don't think he probably had time to really practice. So then Nils Vigeland joined as the pianist in the Feldman soloists, and they toured the world, and he wrote 3 amazing trios for them. Y Patterns was for Morty at the piano. He wanted to write something that he could play himself so that they could tour it together. But then he continued with that ensemble and wrote the 2 other trios, Crippled Symmetry and Philip Guston. The scale of these pieces grew, and I think that partly was because he trusted these performers to be able to pull it off and to commit to it. Guston is 4 or 5 hours long, so. And there are some wonderful stories about them working with him. The end of Crippled Symmetry has an incredible tremolo unison C between the glockenspiel and the vibraphone that is the entire last page of the score. And so it's about 90 minutes long. And when they read the piece for Morty, rehearsed with him, he made one change, which was he walked over to my father's music stand and put a repeat sign on that last page. He wanted that to go on longer, and it really is an absolutely sublime way to end that piece with that unison tremolo.
And when did you start performing Feldman's music yourself?
That's a good question. Probably something I should have thought about before. I would guess in graduate school. So I ended up going back to Buffalo for graduate school to do a PhD in composition and a master's in piano. And I remember playing some of his music with a cellist, with Jonathan Golov, and playing with my piano duo that was formed there in those years of graduate school in the early mid-90s. So I remember playing his music there, playing some of his solo music. So really, was in graduate school in the 90s.
Let's listen to an excerpt of Morton Feldman's Piece for 4 Pianos, performed by the Bugallo-Williams Piano Duo. Has his music influenced your work as a composer?
These questions I always hope musicologists will delve into someday, and that I don't have to be too self-reflective. But I can't imagine it hasn't, maybe not in a very direct stylistic way, but in terms of the way that he approaches the piano has certainly influenced my work as a pianist, and then much of my compositional work is directly tied to my work as a pianist. So the sense of touch and timing and trusting in one's materials, I think that it's probably in there somewhere, but maybe not so directly.
Before we go to Triadic Memories, could you talk about the piece for piano and string quartet? And we'll play a little bit of that recording.
Sure. So I've worked with the Jack Quartet for a number of years now, and I don't really recall how exactly we decided to play this piece, but I suspect it was after a concert and hanging out and saying, wouldn't it be fun to play piano and string quartet together? And so a couple of years ago, we played it for the first time. It's another one of these late, long pieces, about 80 minutes. And it's a fascinating dynamic between the strings that have so much nuance in terms of attack and the piano that really doesn't have as much nuance, although we do our best as pianists, and especially playing Morty's music, you really try to minimize the attack and soften it. And so it was fascinating to put this together because it feels timeless. It feels like these materials just swim around each other with no sense of meter or rhythm, but everything is notated, and we are really counting like crazy the whole time. So that's fascinating as a performer to have this mental energy happening, right? Where you're counting, and then trying to project the music so that it feels timeless. So it's occupying two really different kind of rhythmic spaces at the same time.
Is that type of notation a function of just it's an ensemble piece? Whereas like if you look at some of the maybe solo piano or even like piano duo pieces, it's not exactly rhythmically notated.
Yeah, I wonder, or if it's more that he was able to get that nuanced sense of rhythm with very slight changes through notation. He was able to control, this is over 7 beats, and this one's over 8 beats, and this one's over 9 beats, and so, or this one has one dotted note, but the dotted note changes in the pattern every time where it is. Those kinds of little notational details make the music feel a lot freer than it is. But in fact, a lot of these later pieces are really quite notated. I mean, he experimented with having uncoordinated, like crippled symmetry. Nothing is coordinated between the 3 players. But in this piece, everything is very, very coordinated. But again, there's the question of an arpeggio. How fast is that arpeggio? Does it happen before the beat, on the beat, and where do the strings come in? On the top note of the 7 notes, or on the bottom note, or somewhere in the middle? And so those were the kinds of conversations we had to have. What does together mean? And what is important in terms of coordination? And where is the interpretation? Where is the flexibility?
Let's listen to an excerpt of Morton Feldman's Piano and String Quartet, performed by Amy Williams and the Jack Quartet, live at Black Mountain College. On January 8th in Oakland, you'll be performing Feldman's Triadic Memories, which was written in 1981 toward the end of his life. How does Triadic Memories compare to his earlier piano works?
Well, first of all, it's just the most gorgeous piece. It really is, I think, one of his best pieces. And how does it compare? It's quite dense compared to other pieces, meaning that there's a lot of material. There's a lot of ideas, but he still puts them in this very spacious frame. If you compare it to a piece like Piano from 1977, which is really crunchy, it's really these very dense, dissonant chords the sense of attack is much more present in that piece, and there's a lot less space between ideas. In this case, the sense of space, there are times when it's just continual notes for quite a long time, and then there are places where there's a lot of space between notes. And I find playing it that sometimes the hardest thing to do is to really count through the rests to make sure that space happens. It's easy to want to get on to the next music, but I think that's important, because that's really where the magic of this piece happens, is in these, there are many, many notes, and then the space happens, and that's where the triads happen. The piece has almost no thirds in it. It's seconds and sevenths and ninths and some fourths and fifths, but mostly he's avoiding thirds. And yet in the space and the silence and the resonance, you hear these, it's almost like, is this electronic? Like, where is that sound forming from? And I think that is such a fascinating thing about this piece, is the way triads emerge in the silences, in the resonance. And there's never actual silence. But these harmonies that are sort of hidden in the music come out when you have a little bit of space to listen.
And that's getting at the memories part of the triadic memories.
Exactly.
I was wondering as well, because there are so many like subtle variations and shifting patterns, what effect do you think this type of musical texture has on the listener's memory or ability to recall earlier musical information?
I imagine it's quite different for everybody. There's a kind of state of mind you have to get in to the piece, to listen to any of his long pieces, I think, where you have to lose your sense of what's happening next. Where am I in this piece, right? Where's the form? Where is it going? And that kind of being in the moment as a listener sometimes takes a little time for us to adjust to that. It's a very different kind of experience. But if you can get into that, you're both, the memory is not the most important thing that you say, oh, that happened 20 minutes ago. But it's a more, you're in the moment, you're listening, and it more like a dream state or something, where you think, oh, is that familiar? I've heard that before. Have I heard that? Doesn't really matter. It's, it's not about analyzing it as you listen, or being that aware, but there's a feeling of familiarity when certain things come back, and a feeling that you're in a different place than you were 20 minutes ago or 30 minutes ago. And so when this happens, it's wonderful to recall that, but it's also, you become aware that we're moving into someplace else. So, I mean, I think that experience really is different for everybody listening to the piece, but your sense of time really transforms. Many people have come up to me after some of these long pieces and said, 20 minutes in, I thought, I'm not going to make it. And then it was over. Right? So there's that kind of experience that is really unique, and something we don't maybe get to do so often, especially listening with other people, where we're having this shared experience, right? We're used to being able to change onto the next thing and, flip through and curate our own every moment, and everything's moving so fast. And so to have this experience of listening and breathing and time transforming in a group is really, it can be very moving for people.
Do you have any advice for someone who's not used to listening to this kind of music to, get through a very long piece? Is it just sort of settle in and don't think about it?
It's like any kind of meditative experience, I think. Get comfortable, understand that it's not your usual sense of time. Be open to that. Focus on your breathing. See if you can feel your heartbeat slowing. These kinds of meditative practices, I think, can be very helpful. I remember one time going to see the Feldman Trio play Crippled Symmetry, their last performance, which is has been released on Frozen Reeds. You might have that in your collection there. It's a wonderful live performance. And I was running the festival, and so I thought, I had so much to do, and I brought a legal pad with all my lists of, I thought, well, if I have to take notes, I can't get through 90 minutes, right? And 2 minutes in, I was transformed, really. It was like I was another person for that 90 minutes. And we don't get those experiences too often as audience members. So I encourage people to go with it and allow it to happen.
Let's listen to an excerpt of Morton Feldman's Triadic Memories, performed live by Amy Williams at University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Your performance of Triadic Memories will coincide with Feldman's centennial on January 12th. What do you think is the legacy of his music today?
I think that the focus on instinct, trusting one's instinct, is something that, as an artist, has, there were times where it felt everything had to be structured and planned and methodical and intelligent and well studied and intellectual. And with Morty's music, it's the ears are the most important thing. There are many people who have imitated Morty's style, but they didn't have his ears. The notes are just the right notes. And the timing is, you can't stretch things out over 4 hours if the materials themselves are not sort of perfect. And trusting in those instincts, I think, is something that is very inspiring for musicians and also for audience members. I think that that's maybe one of the most important things. I mean, he was self-educated, right? Never went to college, but brilliantly intellectual, extremely well-read, knew music so deeply that I think that's also an important legacy for people to understand that there are ways to be an artist without necessarily going through the traditional academic path or just studying other people, but really finding your own originality. And he was incredibly, incredibly original.
Do you have anything else that you want to say about the performance before we finish up?
Well, Feldman described the piece as the biggest butterfly in captivity. And I think that that's kind of a fascinating way to look at this piece. It is everything is changing and fluttering about, but there's also something very kind of natural and organic about how it unfolds. And so, I just love that quote.
You can hear Amy Williams perform Morton Feldman's Triadic Memories on Thursday, January 8th, 2026 at Littlefield Concert Hall, Mills College at Northeastern University in Oakland. Thank you, Amy, for joining me today, and thanks everyone for listening.
Thanks, Joey.
This has been an episode of the Other Minds podcast, brought to you by Other Minds. Our 30th festival is October 8th through 11th, 2026 at the Brava Theater in San Francisco.